Yeah, Kevin, do you see a faith justification for some of the things you've ended up believing, or did faith play a part in all at all in your journey of discovering libertarianism and how you fit into that spectrum?
Well, yeah, actually, the thing is, and I'm going to steal a quote here from C.S. Lewis because I love him, and
Yep.
he's got a lot of great quotes. But he said, "I believe in Christianity as I believe in the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else." And that to me is kind of just a motto of my life ever since I became a Christian, ever since I started following Jesus. I've realized that not everything is the way the world wants it to be. And not everything should be the way that many people in the world, in the secular world, want it to be. And as someone of faith, of someone who follows, Christ, someone who tries to study the Bible, put my life into that path, I've learned that philosophically, when it comes to my political philosophy, I have limitations on what I can and can't support, right? So again, perfectly speaking about like the Libertarian Party, right? I love the Libertarian Party 98% of the time. Obviously, I have problems with the Democratic Party, I have problems with the Republican Party, but when it comes to the Libertarian Party, I respect and agree with most of it. But say, for instance, they have a stance on abortion, right? Now, their stance on abortion might be a fairly neutral one, about as neutral as you can be. Basically, the way that it's written out in the party platform, it says something along the lines like that everyone needs to decide in good conscience what they want to do, and the government should have no role. And I agree with that 100%. But as someone who is feels as though I am connected to, the kingdom of heaven and God and Jesus, I feel that I can't be quiet on certain things, especially something that might go against teaching of the Bible, teaching of my faith, as well as, for argument's sake, in my opinion, abortion it violates the NAP, the non-aggression principle, because we're talking about another person inside of
Right.
inside of another person.
Well, this is the perspective on whether an unborn child is a human life really plays a gigantic part in how you view abortion as a principle of liberty really.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, 100%. And I understand there are going to be people who are not inside the faith who will just think that a baby is just an inconvenience at this time, or not a baby, but an unborn
yeah.
mass of cells, a fetus, if you will. Even though, of course, fetus means unborn human offspring, but still, that's besides the point. There is, it's just the idea that even within the Libertarian Party, again, not everyone is going to have a religious faith, so I understand that not everyone agrees with that, but I have trouble supporting it, partially because I'm a Christian, but also partially because of the fact that I do believe it violates the NAP, because life is life, and that life is independent. I mean, we now know, thanks to science, we now know that when it comes to an unborn baby, isn't just a mass of cells and one day it's born. We know that there's a development period. And we now know that by 10, 11, 12 weeks, an unborn child has fully formed body, 2 arms, 2 legs, 10 fingers, 10 toes, independent heartbeats, its own blood type. You know what I mean? It's its own being. So because of that, I find myself sometimes at odds with certain people within the Libertarian Party, again, just from the NAP, the perspective, as well as in addition to the faith issue.
Yeah, it's I mean, people kind of lump the abortion question in with things like gay marriage and drugs, in terms of things that are that were considered taboo topics but now are being explored. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good way to look at them, because I don't think they're necessarily equivalent in terms of I guess you could say victimless crimes. You could say that gay marriage and lesbians getting married, that is what you can consider that a victimless crime. You might not agree with it spiritually, but it doesn't really affect too much. People might argue that it affects society's fabric in certain ways, but all in all, it doesn't affect me too much what someone else does in their bedroom or in how they get married or whatever. Same with drugs. I mean, there's obviously different categories, but you could look at marijuana and see it as something that people can do in their own home. It doesn't affect too many people in most cases. But when you look at abortion, I guess if you view that the unborn child as a human being, then I guess you're kind of compelled to make the case that that is its own distinct person with its own distinct rights, and how, like I said, how you view that fetus really it changes a lot in how you view things, because if you see it as not being a person until it's born, then obviously you can have the view that it's pretty disposable. But it's interesting to talk to people about their reasoning behind it, because for a long time I just stayed silent on the topic because I didn't really want to wade in where I wasn't really an expert. But I like to hear other people's perspectives and what they think on this. But would you agree that they seem to be lumped in as the same issues in terms of rights, but in your case, obviously, you believe that that's a very distinct issue to talk about, really, abortion?
Well, sure. I mean, I understand why people would or could, conflate all those issues together. But if you really think of it, those issues, like you said, are about the individual. So when someone wants to take drugs, it's about them taking drugs. If someone wants to do something which I believe might be against the Bible, but it's they're doing it, it's their conscience, it's their issue. That's fine; they can do that. But when it comes to an unborn child, again, that's an individual that's apart from the mother. The thing is that most people realize or believe or under the impression that when a baby is forming, it's got to be about 40 weeks before it can be born. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. But we now know and have proven time and time again that we can actually deliver and save a baby as early as 20 weeks and do it fairly consistently. So at what point is it no longer part of the mother? At one point, it's either it is or it isn't. So I believe it's an independent being, personally speaking. But again, with those other issues, those are people making decisions for themselves. And I do fully respect that there are people who will look at a pregnancy or a woman has a choice of it's her body. And I understand where they're coming from. I just don't happen to agree on a philosophical level or physiological level.
So do you believe then that in terms of politically that that you can almost agree that people have the right to do it, but you can't stay silent on it? Is that where you're at, or would you say that you're a vocal opponent of that being considered, as part of the party platform?
Right. I do agree that people have the right to do it. It is legal. I don't encourage people to get one. I don't believe it's the right thing to do. If you come to me, I'm going to tell you that, but I'm not going to stop you from doing it. It is legal. Maybe one day, if enough people change their mind and decide that they don't want to do it anymore, don't want to have it to be an option. And again, I used to work in a hospital. I used to work in surgery, and we did a lot of quote unquote abortions, but really they weren't. There were what's called D&Cs or dilation and curettages, or ectopic pregnancies. Now these are obviously either pregnancies that have already ended and they're just being removed, or an unviable pregnancy. But I can understand, when you speak of a medical issue, that someone would have to get an abortion. I understand that. I understand that you will have people who will make an argument saying, well, if it's before this time, it doesn't really count because, it's not really anything. And I understand where they're coming from. I just don't happen to agree. And again, I wouldn't stop anyone at this point. Again, it is law, and I think it should be legal and it should be safe when people get one. I mean, it's kind of terrifying to think if we went back to the 1960s and people were having back alley abortions again, how many people would die. That being said, you can keep it legal all you want. I just think if enough people understood what was going on, understood the process, they would hopefully not want to get an abortion.
And do you not think then we're compelled to make the case for the unborn as if it was an act of murder? Because if you think of it, if you're thinking of that unborn child as its own distinct person, what is the distinction between the killing of that person and the killing of another random person on the street? So why should one be legal and one not?
Correct. No, and absolutely. I mean, I don't think any of it should be legal, but considering it is, I can't stop it. Right. That being said, I do advocate for promoting laws that would prevent it. Mm-hmm. But again, it has to be a choice of enough people. It can't just be me and 10 friends telling the whole world you can't do this. If we get enough people on board, if we get enough people to understand what an unborn baby is, if we get them to understand what is going on, I personally feel convicted to advocate for passing laws eventually. But again, we're not there. not today.
And I'm not. I'm sort of playing a little bit of devil's advocate, although maybe that phrase is slightly ironic in terms of this conversation. But I'm not gonna say my personal perspective because I'm not really sure. Other than I don't think it's right. I'm not sure exactly where I fit on the legal spectrum of what should be legal and what shouldn't and what should be available. But I'm trying to tease out really where you stand on this. So I'm not. I'm only sort of challenging you on this. But Q, what's your opinion on all this topic?
well, I'll tell you. There's a couple different issues at play with this particular topic. One is rights versus responsibilities, and so without a doubt, 100%, I believe in 100% bodily autonomy of the individual. To include the decision whether or not to engage in activities that have consequences. And so you choose to do drugs, you deal with those consequences. You choose to drink and drive, you deal with those consequences. And in which case, if you kill somebody behind the wheel because you are driving recklessly because you're intoxicated, you deal with those consequences. If you choose to have intercourse, you choose to accept those consequences. Rights and responsibilities. And maybe some people will look at that and go, okay, well, I'm a guy, right? What are the consequences for me? Well, the consequences for me, and this is, I chose this life, so this is a decision that I made with my wife. We're married happily for 22 years. We have 3 kids. I just sent one to college. I have 2 daughters and a son. My oldest is a girl, is a young lady. I'm sorry, she's in college, and I've got another one who's a sophomore in high school, and a boy now who is in the 4th grade, right behind her. So, I look at that from a perspective of a father, and how do I raise my daughters? How do I raise my son? Rights versus responsibilities. Certainly, they have bodily autonomy, and they can do whatever they want within the reason, within the confines of not causing a victim. Right.
Right.
They have to square that with their God. We're talking Christians now, right? So if they're going to go off and be promiscuous or have unprotected sex or do things that are going to present the situation where they are now with child, well, that's a responsibility that they take. Mm-hmm. That child that they made through the reproductive act of intercourse didn't have a vote in being created. They didn't get to say, "Hey, I want to be here." They just became.
Yeah.
They're just here, and so now there's a contract there between mother and child. She created this child. She's responsible for the life of this child up to the point to where this child can take care of itself. That's my perspective. And
this is what you would say is a moral contract, I guess.
This is an implicit contract. I would say that this is a contract between mother and child, and for that matter, between father and child as well. It takes 2 to tango, right? So that's an unpopular position a lot of people would take. I'm very pro-life, and I look at it obviously from a biblical perspective, from a moral perspective, but also from a legal perspective. Like anarchy doesn't mean no rules; it just means no rulers, right? So that's a spectrum of libertarianism that I'm at, is 100% liberty. But yet, at some point, you have to deal with the responsibility, and we're never going to get there if we don't recognize the fact that liberty is a 2-sided coin. You have freedom and rights on one side, and then you have responsibilities on the other. And when you do something that creates a person, you're responsible for the life and welfare of that person, up to the point to where that person can take care of itself.
Yeah.
But then, like we said earlier, like I believe earlier, the state has a monopoly on violence. And so when you say there ought to be a law, what we're saying is you ought to be able to put somebody in a cage for doing X. So should I believe that somebody who has an abortion be locked up in a cage for that action? No.
Okay.
But I also believe that I shouldn't have to support them in that action. I shouldn't have to. Remember, I'm a voluntarist. I believe in voluntary human interaction, right? So if this person is going to abort their child, maybe I don't want to affiliate myself with this person.
Right. And
that's kind of where I'm at with it.
My question was, I guess, as a natural follow-on question to when you were talking about it being a contract, my question was, number 1 says who, and number 2, so what? So if you say this is a contract between mother and child, if we believe that that child has a moral value, or a value in terms of it being a person, as you consider yourself a libertarian, how would you then what are the consequences of just going out and having an abortion? Should there be any consequences?
Well,
or
I alluded to that earlier. It's like I don't think the state should lock somebody up.
Yeah.
Right. For that. But I also don't feel like we should have to tolerate it. I'm not gonna, and if I know somebody or I'm aware of somebody who's being reckless in that behavior, then why would I, why affiliate myself with them?
Do you believe there's any lock-upable offenses?
Yeah.
So when you say about the state,
Well, when there's and so so, I mean, maybe. So crime and punishment, right? So that kind of mindset. So like, we should be looking more towards, restoration of the offense. Yeah. So where there's a victim, somebody should receive restitution, right? So if you've killed somebody, then the restitution or the restoration should be geared towards the people who are left behind, family and close friends. Hard to do that. Hard to say what that is with an abortion.
that's
right?
true.
Because the family and close friends would be, well,
The perpetrator,
the one who's perpetrating the crime, right? With quotes, right? The crime itself of abortion. So how do you make mom whole if she's the one that's exercising this action? So that's where it kind of gets sticky, and it's not clean, right? A lot of these liberty things are very dirty when you get down into like where do you draw the line and rights versus responsibilities and
yeah,
man, you asked a blanket question. Are there lock-upable offenses? Yeah, there are. What are they? Well, who's the victim? Right? That's the first question you ask. Is there a victim? Well, then now we can start going down that road. Is how do we make the victim whole? And in almost anything else, murder gets sticky because obviously the victim is dead, but you leave behind a trail of other victims. Yeah. Theft is very clean, right? You stole something from somebody, so you repay what you stole. Make them whole again. So it's some of these things get pretty sticky. So that's a good question. I don't have a clean answer for.